do not need more stuff.
Right.
Matter of fact, I need to get rid of stuff. Okay,
Me too. I'm not moving and I need to get rid of stuff too.
is that good?
Oh, right. That's a mother?
Yeah?
That's mother?
Can I move?
Yeah.
Okay, it's gonna follow me?
It won't follow you, but
Okay.
you have the whole table.
Okay.
If you,
Have I mentioned that I really don't like being videotaped? Have we noticed this? Okay, are there
I can
enough?
work on audio from now on if you'd like.
No, it's fine, whatever, I don't care. You wanted to say that starting next week?
Starting next week, I think we're gonna change the time to 10:30. That works, seems to work better for those people involved.
Is that okay?
Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay, so it'll be in my emails and I'll change it on the website as well, but from now on, 10:30.
Okay,
Great?
great, awesome.
Thank you so
Can
much.
I just ask a question? Instead of this, could we get like an email about it with the donate button?
Sure.
Because like I don't come with the check box, you know.
Yeah.
Like this, I would just click it if I know
Right.
I'm coming.
Okay.
Okay, there should be a donate.
No problem. I'll put a link in the.
Put a link
in the-
right to Leah Herzog's checkbook, right? Leah Herzog, Aliyapon.
What? Nice to meet you.
Okay.
You're gonna need a lot more than that. You're gonna put it out.
I know, I'm aware, I'm keenly aware, but it's okay. All right, hi, welcome. And again, for those of you who would like to do this on your phones, this source sheet is on Safaria. It's a public source sheet. If you just want to search the title, Sefer Yeshayahu, what does Hashem want from us? Okay. So, we're using Sefer Yeshayahu, the book of Isaiah, as a kind of a jumping off point to understand a little bit better what does Hashem actually want from us in the sense of like what's the ideal way to serve God. Right? So last week we talked about korbanot and does God want korbanot, does God not, what's the point of the korbanot, is it a means to an end, is it an end to itself? So this week the title of the shiur is called Natural Relationships, and I'm trying to get more organized here and basically put our two driving questions at the top of the sheet, which is that what is the nature of our relationship with Hashem? And that's obviously not a simple kind of a question. Safaria, you want to go to Safaria.com? What? Nancy was able to find it last week. Yeah. If you search in Safaria, yeah, just do in the top left corner, do the search. I don't know why it's not showing up in public sheets, but so you know the answer to the question, which is obviously a complicated answer, there then drives us to the second question is that given the nature, given the relationship, whatever that relationship title is, that has implications in terms of rights, responsibilities. So what I want to do today, I'm going to motion what I was going to say because otherwise I'm going to knock it over.
I see that you're doing this.
Yes, I know. I hope I don't knock you in the head. Given that there are rights and responsibilities. So what I want to focus on is a little bit on some of the psukim that we did last week. That's going to be our jumping off point. And then I want to focus on one of my favorite parts of Sefer Yeshayahu, which is called Shirat HaKeren, the Song of the Vineyard. But we'll get to that. So at the beginning, the first kind of relationship that we're going to look at is the two relationships with which we are the most familiar, summarized with Avinu Malkeinu, basically, is that the relationship between parent and child, and the relationship between king and servant, or king or master and servant. So I take you back to these first four verses, and I'm going to ask Marcia to read because I made the print smaller this time so that I wouldn't be giving you 9-page packets, but the flip side is that I can't really read it very well. So go ahead.
On Isaiah?
On Isaiah 1:1-4.
The
Yeah.
prophecies of Isaiah, son of Amoz, who prophesied concerning Judea and Jerusalem in the reigns of Uzziah.
Yeah, skip it. It's okay.
Fine.
Yeah, just go to verse 2.
Okay. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I reared children and brought them up, and they have rebelled against me. An ox knows its owner and asks its master's crib. Israel does not know. My people take no thought.
Thank you.
There's one more. You want to?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
All right. So right away in Pasuk Bet and Gimel, we have kind of what we think are as two polar opposite kind of relationships, but they're actually not polar opposites. That's point one, is that what Yeshayahu is saying is that they're intuitively opposite, but practically fairly similar, right? And that is the relationship of children and parent, and animal and owner, right? Because obviously we think of the relationship between children and parents as being the closest, most caring kind of relationship, particularly the parent towards the child. And then we think of animals, particularly these animals, as being dumb and basically just following their masters. Yeah, it's color war in case people hadn't noticed that. That the relationship between the animal and its master, which is supposedly a dumb, behavior-driven relationship a la B.F. Skinner, right? You feed something, it's going to do what you want it to do. But Yeshayahu puts both of these relationships literally one juxtaposed to the other, and what we know from literature is that when two things are juxtaposed one next to the other, there's like a dual purpose. One purpose is to highlight the difference, but the other purpose is to really, on a deeper level, to draw our attention to the fact that it's not as different as you think, the relationship between children, parent, and animal owner. Okay. If you have phones, you can find what I'm doing on Safaria. If you go to safari.org and search the title, What Does Hashem Want From Us, Sefer Yeshayahu number 2, I would offer you my sheet, but I need it. And next week I'll make more. This is really exciting. Okay, so what I'm, just to kind of give you a sense of what I'm going to be doing is, I'm looking at some, there's another chair over here. Come on over. And I'll try not to smack you with my hands. You know what, maybe what I'll do is I'll just stand back a little bit so that I'm not, hopefully not smacking anybody. That's why I stand in the front of the classroom. Otherwise things fly. Okay. There you go. Have a seat. And again, you can find this on safaria.org. If you just search, in the search the title, Sefer Yeshayahu, What Does Hashem Want? Shir 2 should come up. So I'm drawing your attention to two quotes, both of which are from the Torah. One is from Sefer Devarim and one is from Sefer Vayikra. The quote from Sefer Devarim, which is a very famous quote, Banim atem la'Hashem Elokeichem. The Torah tells us straight out that God considers us His children, and that we should consider ourselves as God's children. And then the second quote, which seems again to be the antithesis, which is in Sefer Vayikra, where Hashem says, Ki b'nei Yisrael avadim avadayim, because the children of Israel are servants or slaves, and they are my servants or slaves. So I'm going to actually start with the servant-slave thing first and go back to the children thing. The word for servant and slave in Hebrew, both of those are eved. And they mean legally, obviously, very, very different things. But in terms of their basic concept, what an eved is a human being who is dependent on another human being for protection, for food, for shelter, for clothing, all of this kind of stuff. In other words, is that basically the eved, whoever the eved is, does not have any autonomy, does not have any financial independence, and is dependent on either on his boss or on his master. And what happens to that eved is completely up to the decisions and the whims of the master/boss, which is why in Judaism, as opposed to the Code of Hammurabi, the laws protecting slaves and servants are incredibly complex and rich. In other words, if you were to open up the Code of Hammurabi and read all of their many, many, many rules, and then you would put the Torah side by side, whether it's Parshat Mishpatim, which I think we read last week. I'm constantly off a little bit. So we read Parshat Mishpatim last week, and then there are tons of laws in Sefer Devarim. If you put the two side by side, there's a lot of similarity. And this similarity is not a coincidence. In other words, these are both legal systems that grew up at the same time, and I subscribe to the idea of the Rambam, which we discussed last week, is that rather than reinventing the wheel, when we got the Torah, we took systems that were there and that existed and which originated way back in the time of Adam and Noah, and then had evolved and dispersed with the cultures, and then kind of re-vectored them towards God and towards the service of Hashem.
Aren't the rules of Eved coming straight from Hashem? It's not that we took the system.
So the question becomes like this: is the Torah in its origin original, or is the Torah as we know it now a holy version of things that existed then? And that's the fundamental debate between the Rambam on one hand and the Ramban and the Abarbanel on the other hand. So the Ramban and the Abarbanel feel very strongly that what we see in front of us in Chamisha Chumshei Torah is original. It is Hashem's word.
That's Rambam?
That's a Ramban, Nachmanides, and Abarbanel.
Okay.
That it is Hashem's word. It is, and it's original, and it is any resemblance to other legal systems is purely coincidental. The Rambam, Maimonides, takes a different approach, and his approach is that these systems existed, these celebrations of holidays existed, these sacrifices existed, and what Hashem did is, and they all came from the same place. In other words, they all come from the time when monotheism was the only game in town, in the time of earliest humans and Adam Harishon. The Gemara talks about this in terms of Hanukkah, that there was always some kind of a solstice recognition that goes back all the way to Adam Harishon. And then as the nations grew, and particularly after the Mabul and Migdal Babel, and practices developed, human beings made up paganism and Avodah Zarah as a way for them to more easily grasp the workings of the divine. So that when we leave Mitzrayim, 10 generations after Abraham, that instead of reinventing a whole new religion, what Hashem is doing is taking existing practices and saying, we are taking these practices and vectoring them towards Avodat Hashem, and we're making them holy, and then we're also instilling into this religion the idea of the all-powerful, omniscient, Hayahoveh v'Yihiyeh creator, that there's something beyond the physical that we can't understand.
Who did this? Who took these systems and made them?
So according to the Rambam, this is what Hashem did when he gave the Torah to Moshe. In other words, the Torah as we see it is Hashem's way of saying, this is what's holy. This is the edited version of, this is now what is holy. This is what I actually really want. This kind of almost, it's like Matan Torah is seen both in terms of the Gemara and Medrash, but even in terms of the text, as a Gan Eden do-over. So it's like, this is what I wanted in the first place. And then things got messed up, and there was a flood, and there was a Migdal Bavel, and there was a Avodah Zarah, and all of this kind of stuff. We're wiping that clean. This is 2.0, but 2.0 is really 1.0b. And then Chet HaEgel happened. Does that make sense?
Right, so they're both coming from Hashem.
They're both coming from Hashem.
Okay,
It's just
so
a question. Okay, so let me be clear. The Torah is divine. The question is whether it's something completely new and different, or whether it's a redoing of something that existed in a different direction. Okay? So in any case, oh well. I'm just warning.
What's one?
Okay, for those of you who have never been to Mayanot during Color War, all chaos is going to break loose very quickly. There's going to be a lot of noise in the halls because they run around doing all kinds of crazy things. It's actually a lot of fun, but anyway, just heads up. It's not usually quite this chaotic here. So what the concept of an Eved is the idea that we, as one human, is completely and totally dependent on his or her master/boss. On the other hand, the master/boss has responsibilities towards his servant, slave, employees. So that when you look at, for example, the relationship between an animal and its master, right? The master has to take care of the animal, and in return, the animal is supposed to serve its master, which is why when an animal doesn't do its job, it's okay to actually physically hit that animal. It's not okay to abuse that animal. And there are laws that protect against animal abuse, and there's actually huge discussion now in the kashrus world whether animals that are mistreated, are they even kosher, even if they are shechted properly? And I mean, these laws are wide-ranging, and there are huge sections of the Gemara that talks about how to treat your ox and what an ox is responsible for legally and what the owner is responsible for legally. It's really clear that the relationship is a two-directional. Obviously, the master has the upper hand. So by saying that, comparing us to animals, it's saying that we are servants of Hashem, but we're still human. But what Yeshayahu is saying, and this is in the Malbim, which I think is on the back of your first page, what the Malbim is saying is that as animals, at the very least, are completely aware of their dependence. What has happened is that we have lost, as Bnei Israel, we have lost our awareness of our dependence on Hashem and on how much we are dependent on Hashem. And I think that's a very true message for us today. It's that one of, at least for me, one of the reasons for tefillah in general is that daily reminder of humbling ourselves, the daily reminder of how small we are in the face of something so huge. And as somebody myself who lives with a disability, I have an easier time remembering that, but I think in general, any of us who live fairly autonomous lives have a tendency to forget that everything that we have comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is not something new in human nature. Yeshayahu was talking about this 2,500 years ago. At the other extreme, though, we are children of Hashem, right? We are Hashem's beloved, and Hashem feels towards us the love and the protectiveness that a parent would feel towards his or her child. And many times in the Torah, Hashem is referred to as father, but there are also times in the Torah when Hashem is referred to as mother and is referred to in the feminine, particularly by Moshe and by some of the later prophets. So, and the Malbim talks about in his explanation here up at the top that a child has, at the very bare minimum, a demand to respect and to revere his parent, right? We have Kaved et Avicha Imecha, which is in Sefer Shemot, honor thy father and thy mother, and then in Sefer Vayikra, Ish et Aviv et imo tira'o, that a person should have awe of his parents. Yira is not fear so much as reverence, the idea of not sitting in your parents' place, and so when Hashem says that I have raised children, banim gidalti, and the word legadel doesn't just mean physically, but it also means practically, right? That I have made them great. I took these slaves out of Egypt and made them into not only an autonomous nature, but at this point in the time that Yeshayahu was talking about, this is a nation that has held the Assyrian Empire at bay on its northeastern border and has held the Egyptian empire at bay on its southwestern border. And we know how tiny this nation is, right? This is like, that would be like saying that New Jersey holds off New England from the north and the Atlantic and southern states and Texas from the south and west. Like this is a huge accomplishment. So that I made them agree, and I have loved them, and I have given them everything they want. Vehem pashubi. And I want to draw your attention to that verb. We talked about it a little bit last week, but a pesha is a mindful, conscious, full knowing rebellion. There are three types of sin. There's chet, there's avon, and there's pesha. The word chet means a missing the mark. It's a chet is something where your intention is probably good and you messed up, or simply there was a lack of consciousness. You wake up Shabbat morning at 3 a.m., you walk into the bathroom and you flip on a light. That's a chet. You have done something wrong, but it's because you were half asleep. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't, you shortchanged somebody. Lashon hara comes out of your mouth because you're not exercising enough self-control. It's not that you feel that slander is something that's appropriate. It's just you mess up. So that's one level. Avon, la'avet means to misguide. So an avon is you are doing something intentional, but it's your thought process is misguided. So you're doing something wrong, but basically you're doing something wrong for the wrong reason. So it counts, but it still doesn't count as much. So again, I'm going to use the idea, let's say you assume in, the laws of Lashon Hara in business, for example, are very, very strict. And we know that if it's to protect somebody either in a business deal or in a shidduch, that you actually are allowed to say negative things because there's huge stakes. So let's say you're saying something negative about somebody and then it turns out that you're wrong. That's an avon, right? You are doing it knowingly, but you are misinformed or misguided in your intent. So it's not an accident, but it's also not, that you are necessarily intentionally or very often people are raised in traumatic circumstances, right? Think about people who grew up religious before the Holocaust and then went through the Holocaust. It's like their minds have been so altered by the trauma that they're almost not responsible to some degree for what they do afterwards. A pesha, though, is a rebellion. And even in the Tanakh, the verb vayifsha means to rebel. So a pesha is, you know what's right, you know what's wrong. You know what the stakes are, and you do it anyway. And so the fact that Hashem says, Banim gidalti v'romamti v'hem pashubi, I have raised them physically and emotionally, and I have not only raised them, but I've elevated them. They're full aware of whose shoulders they're standing on, and they have rebelled against me. That's what's so harsh, and that's why Hashem is so hurt, because as a child, the natural expectation is respect and reverence, and as adult children who can look back and see where they've come from, the expectation is gratitude, and God gets none of that. So he's hurt, he's angry, he's wounded. He's not done with us yet. It's going to take another 150 years before he's done with us. But this is the point. He's like, are you kidding me? The most precious relationship that we have with God, which is kind of implicit in Sefer Yeshayahu, but is not explicit anymore, is the relationship that we have with God as humans, which is what's outlined for us when we're created in Genesis chapter 1. Right? That that Hashem says, and I'm going to quote somewhat from memory, Nasa Adam b'tzelmeinu kidmutenu, let us make humans, and I'm purposely translating the word Adam as human and not men or male, because in Parak Aleph it is talking about a human, a Homo sapien or Homo sapien sapien, in the words of Gerald Schroeder, hominid, choose your title. Let us make humans in our image. So what does that mean, to be in God's image and God's form? God is not corporeal, right? God is not material. So the Mefarshim have a field day here, and you can just literally pull up any commentary, and that commentary, one commentary will be different from another. But basically what it means to be in God's form and in God's image means that we are spiritual, not just physical. It means that we have a degree of free will and choice that animals do not have, that are ruled way more by instinct, that we have the ability to create and destroy, to really build something completely different than anything that's been there before. We have a degree of imagination and creativity that even the most sapient mammals don't have, or at least we haven't found that they have. So, and that we are kind of tiny little mirror images of the divine. So then it says in the next verse, Vayivra Elokim et ha'adam, that God created, and this verb, Vayivra, to create, really means ex nihilo. Nachmanides explains that at the beginning. So clearly humans weren't created ex nihilo because the world was already there, but this idea of what it means to be human is something that's so unique. It's as if we're ex nihilo. Et ha'adam b'tzomo, he created humans in his image. B'tzelem Elokim bara oto, zachar nekeva bara otam. Right? That male humans and female humans, we are all created in the image of God. And as a result, we are not quite God's equals, but we're more than just children. We're really mini-me's of Hashem. In other words, it's not that we're one generation below. We're kind of almost like, we're kind of clones. We're God clones, which is a huge responsibility, right? And which Hashem tried to protect us from some of that responsibility, and we messed up on that. But what our responsibility as humans, and this is this very, very long Malbim in teeny tiny print, which I didn't realize was so teeny tiny, and I do apologize for the teeny tiny. But what the Malbim is saying here is that as humans, we not only are bodies, we are not only mammals, animals, we are not even only children, but as humans, we have a piece of the divine in us. And that our responsibility is, first and foremost, is to constantly work on that connection with our neshamot, with our souls, and with our divinity. And anything that we do that sidetracks us from that is we lessen ourselves. Now that doesn't mean we're supposed to be hermits. It doesn't mean we're necessarily supposed to be sitting in a Beit Midrash all day. That's not what the Malbim is espousing. What the Malbim is saying is that we have to constantly be mindful of our souls, and everything that we do in life has to take our souls into account. And if we don't do that, that in and of itself is at best a disregard of what Hashem has given us, and at worst a rebellion. Because like you're spitting in God's face, He's given you something, you're saying, I don't want it, I don't care, I'm not going to nurture it. So, and as I said, this is implicit in what the Navi is saying, because the Navi is talking to human beings, and the assumption, and this is what the Malbim says, is the assumption is at least you know what it means to be a human. You're not animals. And what Yeshayahu is saying is, have you lost your understanding of what it means to be a human being? Forget about being children of God. Forget about being servants of God. You are humans. You are fundamentally, qualitatively different than animals. And yet, an animal knows that it's an animal, but you have forgotten that you're a human. And that's a really devastating indictment. I'm going to pause here. Questions, comments before we move into the next section? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, let's move along. Okay, so the next section, which is I think on page 2 or 3, we're gonna look at other kinds of relationships which are described, and we're going to go into the Shirat HaKerem, which is the relationship between the lover and loveress, or the beloved and the loved, however you want to call it, and using nature as the metaphor for this. So right before we get the Torah in Sefer Shemot, and Marsha, I'm going to pick on you again, if you could read Exodus 19:5.
Sure. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my...
Working?
Yeah.
Good, excellent, okay.
Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine.
Okay, so you see that even in this verse, there's this kind of tension between I adore you, but with that adoration comes a responsibility. And a ketubah is a contract. And part of our relationship with God, even in this kind of marriage, precious, Har Sinai, the Torah is viewed as a contract. And there's this underlying tension between I love you and you love me. But the only way we can be a happy family is if we both hold up our ends of the bargain. And if something goes wrong with that bargain, then the contract is voided, effectively. And Hashem is saying this at the very beginning. It's like, I love you, I adore you, but there's a but. And I have responsibilities to you as the beloved, but you have responsibilities to me as the one that is loved or loving. I mess that up all the time. And then in Sefer Devarim, which is the end of the Torah, right? We've got Matan Torah at one end and the end of the Torah at the other end, which is what you have here is probably one of my all-time favorite verses in the whole Torah, where Hashem says, "Lo merubchem mikol ha'amim chashach Hashem bachem," that it's not because you're great or you're mighty that God wanted you. Ki atem ha'me'at mikol ha'amim, because you are in fact either the smallest numerically or the most insignificant of all the nations. Ki me'ahavat Hashem etchem, but Hashem, why do I want you? Because I love you. Umishamru et hashvuah. Again, we have these two concepts that are right next to each other. I love you, and I made a promise to you. And these are, in a way, they're like two ends of consequences, right? Love has obligation. Obligation breeds love. Just had a conversation about, different ways of marriage with one of my classes, that the Western model of romantic love versus the more Eastern model of your parents arranged the marriage, and it doesn't really matter whether you like each other or not. It's a contractual agreement, and your job is to make it work, kind of the Tevye model or the Shtata model. And what's really fascinating is that about 20 years ago in India, they did a study where they asked people, men and women, from every caste and every socioeconomic strata, what they feel is the better model, the find your own spouse model or the arranged marriage model. And the study revealed something over 90% of the population, including the upper castes, including people who had found their own spouses, felt that the arranged marriage system was actually a preferable system for like all sorts of reasons. I found that a very, very fascinating study. So Yeshayahu, I'm going to skip this next source for a second. Yeshayahu describes the love that is between male and female using the model of a vineyard. And I want to go into these verses a little bit more closely. The reason that I gave you the source at the bottom from Shir HaShirim, from Songs of Songs, is that the language that Yeshayahu uses here is an homage to the language that Shlomo uses in Shir HaShirim. Shir HaShirim is, what?
I don't, Fern had a question.
Fern had a question. Okay, hang on one second.
Of course,
Okay.
finish your
And that Shir HaShirim, which is literally a love poem on its face, which the Gemara describes as a love poem between Hashem and Bnei Yisrael, is not straight prosaic Hebrew. It is incredibly lyrical, poetic, lots of end sounds, lots of e's and ayichs, and these kind of elongated sounds that poets would put in. And Yeshayahu uses very much the same style. And anybody who's listening to what Yeshayahu says, as soon as he says these words, Ashira na li didi, is going to be like, oh, Shir HaShirim. Right? He's going to hear that word Yedid, and he's going to hear that word Shir, and he's immediately going to tune back in his memory to Shir HaShirim, just like in Perek Aleph when Yeshayahu says, Ha'azinu HaShamayim ba'adabeira, right, or Shim'u Shamayim, again, they're going to tune into that cultural memory, whether they're religious, quote-unquote, or not. These are things that they know, and immediately that illusion, that meme, is going to be brought up. And Shir HaShirim, which is the source down here at the bottom, also uses these natural metaphors, right? That I am the rose of Sharon, and you are the lily, and we're going to build a house of cedars, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second. First.
So I was going to, it's not exactly a question, maybe it's a comment that when we have the image of an animal and a master,
Mm-hmm.
that's one image. When you move into the lover, that becomes a much fuzzier thing.
Yes.
Because you're not talking about equals, and the mutuality therefore is fuzzy. And if the complaint is that Hashem's doing his part, what's going on with you, you're not doing your part, so then you bring in the ketubah. And that makes me think there's the fuzziness right there, because the ketubah is not really a contract. It's not really a mutual agreement signed by two sides. It's really a declaration by the one with more power to stating his obligation to the other one. We know later, of course, that the wife has very important obligations, otherwise, she can be disposed of. But the ketubah itself is really just one-sided, coming from the powerful one. So that's more, that in a way does mirror our relationship with Hashem, because we're saying Hashem is the powerful one, Hashem is in control, and Hashem is doing his part. So then when we use the ketubah, we kind of fall off an edge, because the ketubah does not include a mutual giving
Except
back.
it does, as soon as the bride takes possession of that ketubah, or the ring, or both, right? And as soon as the relationship is consummated physically, which once upon a time it could be column A, column B, or column C, and now we have A, B, and C all together, she is effectively, not just effectively, she is legally agreeing and accepting that contract and all of the mutual rights and responsibilities that come with it. In other words, I'm accepting the fact that my husband owes me lodging, clothing, and physical attention, right? However, I'm also accepting the fact that as a wife, I owe my husband whatever a wife owes her husband.
That's
and
not in the contract.
That's not in the contract,
And
correct, but
that's the point.
but when she accept, like in the laws of kinyan, of acquisition, as soon as you take possession of something, you are agreeing to all of the terms of that arrangement, be they written or understood. So and that's why in a way that the metaphor, like, or particularly when we said, na'as, kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh, everything that God says we will do, so we agreed to it orally, and then when Moshe comes down with the tablets, certainly by the second time, when he doesn't smash them, and we're effectively receiving those tablets, then we are saying we accept. So you're right that the greater obligation is on God. And we're going to see that in this metaphor
Or
of the
the
vineyard.
most overt.
The most overt. But then there are, so to speak, natural consequences that come with that. And that's exactly what Yeshayahu was saying. And that's, to some degree, what Shlomo is saying, right? I love you, and you love me, and we have pledged our troth as loving each other. Why are you hiding from me? That's the whole premise of Shir Hashirim, is this couple, this lover and this loveress, and they have pledged their troth, and supposedly she loves him as much as he loves her, and she goes running after him and goes to search for him, and runs, but then every time she goes back to the palace and doesn't wait for him, and he comes knocking at the door, and he comes looking for her, and she's like, this ambivalence that you have between the palace and the lover is very